Hakodate, 26th September, 1954. Tōya Maru leaves with 1,114 people as Typhoon Marie closes in. 4 hours later, 1,155 are dead near shore, but the storm was only part of the trap. Most retellings stop at a simple answer. A captain sailed into a typhoon. The official record is more troubling because it describes a whole transport system with almost no room for failure. The danger began with a deceptive break in the weather. It became deadly when waves entered a deck built to carry trains, then reached the systems keeping the ship alive. The grounding near Nanaehama was not the beginning of the disaster. It was the final turn in a chain that had been tightening for almost 4 hours. Before the Seikan Tunnel, the Tsugaru Strait broke Japan's railway in two. Train ferries formed the moving bridge between Honshu and Hokkaido. Tōya Maru carried passengers' mail and entire railcars from Hakodate to Aomori. On this voyage, 12 railcars weighing about 313 tons occupied its vehicle deck. Efficiency created the ferry's defining weakness. Railcars needed a large opening at the stern, and the official inquiry found that opening lacked an effective barrier against heavy boarding seas. Openings from that deck also led toward machinery and boiler spaces below. In normal service, they were manageable. In repeated heavy seas, they formed paths for water. That vulnerability still needed a trigger. On 26th of September, Typhoon number 15 crossed western Japan at exceptional speed, moved through the Sea of Japan, and developed before reaching Hokkaido. Internationally, the storm was called Marie. In Japan, it would later carry the name of the ship, whose loss came to define that night. The Tōya Maru Typhoon. At 1600 in Hakodate, rain fell under low pressure and strong easterly wind. By 1700, the pressure had fallen further, but the wind suddenly weakened and the clouds opened. For a brief moment, it looked as though the storm's center had passed. That impression was wrong, but it arrived at exactly the moment. The suspended ferry service was waiting for improvement. The ferry had arrived from Aomori at 11:05 and prepared to return at 14:40. A shoreside power failure then complicated removal of the movable rail bridge. At about 1500, the captain concluded that the departure window had been lost and suspended the sailing. Other ferries in Hakodate and Aomori were also waiting. After the apparent clearing, the captain announced a departure around 1830. The later judgment concluded that the typhoon had not passed and that Tōya Maru should have remained in port. At 1839, the ferry departed with 1,214 people, 12 railcars, and mail. The number comes from the formal inquiry, not a newspaper estimate or later guess. The ship headed toward the breakwater. Before it could begin the crossing, the crew found waves outside far worse than the temporary calm inside the harbor had suggested. The crossing was abandoned almost as soon as it began. Instead of returning through the breakwater, the captain chose to anchor outside and wait for the storm to pass. The official chronology places the first anchor drop at about 1901. It did not hold, so a second anchor went down and both chains were lengthened. Anchoring was a normal response to dangerous weather, but Tōya Maru was now held near breaking seas with its large stern opening exposed to water climbing over the vehicle deck. Around 1930, waves were sending seawater onto the deck. Because the deck was broad and nearly open from side to side, the water could spread forward and move as the ship rolled. The crew tightened railcar lashings, checked closures, cleared drains, and removed loose blocking material. Each task had to be performed on a deck that was becoming more violent by the minute. Then, a heavier sea surged through the stern. Water rushed between the railcars and drove forward across the deck faster than the drainage system could remove it. By about 2030, conditions had become too dangerous. The crew withdrew from the vehicle deck, leaving the stern to the boarding seas. The water did two kinds of damage at once. It attacked stability on the vehicle deck while also finding routes into the machinery and boiler spaces below. Water on a wide deck shifts toward the side that is already dropping. That moving weight makes it harder for the ship to return upright, a problem known as free surface effect. It was not simply the weight of the water, its freedom to move changed the ship's balance with every roll, while flooding below added weight where the vessel could no longer control it. The inquiry agency commissioned model research published in 1957. It supported the link between water on the vehicle deck, flooding in lower spaces, and dangerously reduced or even negative stability. This is the key reversal. The Typhoon did not need to tear the hull apart. It only had to keep feeding water into a deck whose design let that water spread and descend. As water reached the lower spaces, generators became unusable. Without reliable electrical power, pumping the flooded compartments became increasingly difficult. The ship still needed its engines to face the seas, resist the dragging anchors, or escape the dangerous water near the breakwater. Those engines now depended on spaces being flooded from above. At about 2150, the left main engine stopped. At about 2205, the right engine also became unusable. Propulsion, steering control, and effective pumping were slipping away together. Now, Tōya Maru was no longer sheltering at anchor. It was a flooded, unstable ferry being dragged toward the Hokkaido coast without the power needed to control its heading. The wind strengthened and the anchors dragged faster. Each wave pushed the powerless ship closer to Nanaehama, while the water on deck shifted into the growing heel. Near the breakwater, the disturbed seas averaged roughly 6 meters. This was not open ocean disappearance. The ferry was being destroyed within sight of land. At about 22:15, the captain ordered the chief purser to have passengers put on life jackets. Machinery failure, dragging anchors, flooding, and heel had left almost no margin. The order came only 11 minutes before the ferry first touched bottom. By then, the official account says, Tōya Maru had already heeled more than 45 degrees. At about 22:26, the hull touched bottom 3 times near Nanaehama. Grounding might sound like rescue, but the ship reached the shallows already flooded, disabled, and severely heeled. Bottom contact changed the ferry's position and exposed its side to the wind and waves. More water entered through openings as the angle increased beyond recovery. The grounding helped complete the capsize, but it did not create the original loss of stability. Water on the vehicle deck and flooding below had already robbed the ferry of control. At about 22:45, Tōya Maru rolled over with its bottom exposed and sank near the shore. Of the 1,014 people aboard, only 159 survived. Among the foreign passengers was Second Lieutenant George A. Vaillancourt. His award citation says he brought his men from below, helped them obtain life belts, and continued calming passengers as the ship listed. Later veteran records identify Private First Class Francis P. Godkin as the sole American survivor. That detail is credible, but does not come from a complete surviving passenger manifest. The official death count on Tōya Maru is 1,155, 1,041 passengers, 73 crew members, and 41 other people. The National Archives repeats the same baseline, but Tōya Maru was not the only ferry lost that night. 4 more JNR ferries were being overwhelmed by the same typhoon. They were Tokachi Maru, Hidaka Maru, Kitami Maru, and Dai 11 Seikan Maru. Their losses killed another 275 crew members. Across all 5 ferries, 1,430 people died. That wider figure is often folded into the Tōya Maru story, producing inflated claims that the passenger ferry alone killed more than 1,500. The accurate distinction is simple: 1,155 deaths on Tōya Maru, 1,430 across the 5 ferry disaster. Other ship-specific counts exist, but they should not displace the official inquiry's figures. The full loss sequence lasted just over 4 hours. Departure at 1839, anchoring around 1901, boarding water around 1930, engine failures, grounding at 22:26, and sinking around 22:45. The speed of the collapse matters. Each new failure removed the tool needed to answer the previous one until anchoring, pumping, propulsion, and stability were all failing together. Investigators did not settle for blaming the weather. They interviewed survivors, crew, railway officials, ferry staff, and meteorological personnel while gathering thousands of pages of evidence. The investigation heard from about 200 people, prepared 2,025 pages of statements, and collected 133 documentary items, totaling another 1,010 pages. It also commissioned the stability study. The first instance judgment came on 22 September 1955. Higher proceedings opened on 6 April 1956, and the second instance judgment followed on 9 February 1959. The final finding did hold the captain's professional negligence causal. He had departed while the typhoon remained dangerous, when the safe decision was to wait. But the inquiry did not stop with him. It found the ship's structure unsuitable for the real conditions of Seikan service, especially the large stern opening and routes into lower spaces. It also blamed JNR's operating management. Safety had been left too heavily to one captain, without adequate shoreside intervention, emergency arrangements, or a system able to stop a dangerous departure. The official answer was therefore multi-causal. A dangerous decision activated design weaknesses inside an operating system that lacked strong safeguards. Remove any one layer, and the outcome might have changed. That finding corrects 2 myths. The captain was not cleared, but neither was he treated as the only reason a sound ship had been lost to freak weather. The reforms followed the same system's logic. A November 1954 resolution called for better management, faster forecasts, stronger radio communication, safer mooring arrangements, and deeper investigation. Technical changes attacked the water's path. Stern doors were added, propulsion shifted toward diesel, and later rules addressed stability, vehicle deck openings, water accumulation, and emergency protection. The lesson was larger than any door or engine. A captain should never have to make a perfect weather judgment, while vessel design, shore management, and emergency authority wait to see whether it works. The disaster also changed the future of the crossing. A tunnel beneath the Tsugaru Strait had been studied before 1954, but Tōya Maru gave the project new political and human urgency. Geological surveys had begun in 1946, so the tunnel was not born from the sinking. The accurate claim is that the disaster accelerated a project Japan had already begun considering. Inclined shaft work began on the Hokkaido side in 1964. Full construction followed in 1971, with engineers tunneling through difficult rock beneath the strait. The pilot tunnels broke through in 1983 and the main tunnel in 1985. The completed railway tunnel extended 53.85 kilometers beneath and across the strait. On the 13th of March 1988, the Seikan Tunnel opened. A fixed railway finally connected Honshu and Hokkaido without placing trains and passengers aboard ferries exposed to the strait's storms. The ferry service ended as the tunnel opened. Yet its history remains visible in Hakodate aboard Maru, a preserved Seikan ferry maintained as a museum. Tōya Maru is sometimes confused with Tōya Maru, a different vessel sunk during the Second World War. The 1954 ship was a civilian train ferry, not a wartime troop transport or hell ship. The evidence leaves no need for invented ballast maneuvers, crushed passengers, or a mysterious anchor pendulum. The documented sequence is powerful enough: departure, boarding water, flooding, power loss, drift, grounding, and capsize. Typhoon Marie supplied the force, but the ferry's open vehicle deck gave the water a path. The engines then failed before the ship reached the shallows. The captain's decision mattered, but so did a vulnerable ship and a management system that allowed one mistaken reading of the weather to become irreversible. That is why the official inquiry blamed more than the storm, and why 1,155 deaths reshaped Japanese ferry safety. Which failure do you think offered the last real chance to save Tōya Maru? Thank you for watching the story of Tōya Maru. Subscribe for more carefully researched cases and continue with the next case waiting on screen.